Excellencies, distinguished delegates, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I call to order to resume again item 5A, general debate. Please take a seat, please. Thank you. Thank you. I kindly remind all speakers that 3-minute rule will be enforced, whereby the speaker's microphone will be cut out automatically. In order to ensure an inclusive process, after every 5 state parties speak, I will invite 1 civil society representative, 1 UN entity representative, and 1 national human rights institution representative, as applicable, to join the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I now recognize the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic. Please, the floor is yours.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. السيدات والسادة، أحمل إليكم تحيات أبناء وطني وتمنياتهم لجهودكم بأن تكلل بالنجاح لخدمة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في كل مكان. إننا نتطلع لتعزيز التعاون الدولي الثنائي ومتعدد الأطراف لإتاحة الفرص وبناء المهارات والقدرات وتمكين الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة ودعمهم في كافة أوجه حياتهم، إذ أن الجهود الوطنية مهما كانت كبيرة ستبقى قاصرة في دولنا النامية عن تحقيق الأهداف المأمولة، وذلك لعوامل ترتبط بالإمكانات الاقتصادية تارة والعوامل السياسية الخارجية تارة أخرى. سيد الرئيس، انطلاقا من إيمانها بأهمية حماية وتعزيز حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، أقرت الحكومة السورية في العام 2022 الخطة الوطنية للإعاقة، التي تقوم على 4 أهداف استراتيجية، هي تطوير القدرات المؤسساتية، تعزيز تقديم الخدمات الصحية والتأهيلية، تسهيل وصول الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة إلى الخدمات العامة، والتنمية الاجتماعية الدامجة. وعملت الحكومة السورية على تطوير البنية المؤسساتية المسؤولة عن الملف عبر إنشاء المجلس الأعلى لشؤون الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، والذي يعد المرجعية الأولى والمسؤول الأساسي عن رسم السياسة العامة للدولة في المجالات ذات الصلة وضمان إعمال حقوق ذوي الإعاقة. تتعاون بلادي أيضاً مع الأمم المتحدة وغيرها من المنظمات الدولية والشركاء الدوليين لتقديم الدعم المادي والفني لذوي الإعاقة وتوفير برامج التوعية والاندماج والتدريب لهم ولمقدمي الرعاية، ومدهم باحتياجاتهم الأساسية بما فيها الأطراف الصناعية، ودعم مشاريعهم الإنتاجية وسبل العيش من خلال الدعم المالي والقروض الميسرة. سيد الرئيس، إن جهود الحكومة السورية تصطدم بتحديات كبيرة فرضتها الحرب الإرهابية التي شنت على سوريا، حيث أدت جرائم التنظيمات الإرهابية وما خلفته من ألغام وذخائر متفجرة لزيادة كبيرة في أعداد الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، وزادت التدابير القسرية الانفرادية اللا شرعية من حجم المعاناة، وحدد بشكل كبير من قدرة الحكومة السورية على توفير الخدمات الأساسية والتجهيزات الطبية والأطراف الصناعية التي يحتاجها ذوي الإعاقة.
Thank you. I invite now distinguished representative of Czechia. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it is my honor to represent Czechia at the 17th session of the Conference of States Parties to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Czechia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union, and I would like to add the following in my national capacity. Since last year, Czechia has made further progress in advancing the rights of persons with disabilities and implementing the Convention, particularly Articles 12 and 29. This year, Czechia has adopted a new law on election administration. This new law contains numerous provisions designed to support persons with disabilities in exercising and expanding their voting rights. Through reasonable accommodation, it ensures the accessibility of the entire electoral process to enable voting independently and in secret. The new law removes obstacles to voting rights for persons with disabilities under full or partial guardianship, ensuring they are no longer denied the right to vote. It also clarifies assistance rules at polling stations, eliminating unnecessary restrictions such as requiring an assistant to have acting voting rights or excluding District Election Commission members from providing assistance, which must be recorded. Assistance is provided to anyone needing it for legitimate reasons, emphasizing adherence to voters' instructions and maintaining confidentiality. Additionally, the law mandates the Ministry of the Interior to publish information on the barrier-free accessibility of polling stations and voting principles in Czech Sign Language through the Election Administration Information System. The law will take effect in January 2026. Mr. Chair, finally, I would like to note that in response to the ongoing Russian aggression, state, regional, and municipal authorities in Czechia, along with non-governmental and humanitarian organizations, continue to provide essential assistance and humanitarian aid to refugees from Ukraine, including persons with disabilities and their families. I thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the representative of Colombia to have the floor, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Como hombre ciego y como funcionario del Estado colombiano, es un honor transmitirles los mensajes de cambio y transformación que adelantamos en mi país. Estamos repensando los retos actuales de la inclusión de las personas con discapacidad. Enfrentamos problemas sociales viejos y otros nuevos que mantienen y producen y amplían las brechas de desigualdad y de inequidad. Colombia es consciente que las luchas sociales históricas de la población con discapacidad han sido por el reconocimiento social y por ello estamos trabajando en amplias reformas estructurales al sector laboral, educativo, pensional y de la salud para hacerlos más inclusivos, para que respondan a las crisis actuales y contemporáneas, para que resuelvan los problemas viejos y para que reconozcan a las personas con discapacidad. Las políticas públicas no tienen sentido si no resuelven el sufrimiento de las personas con discapacidad en la vida cotidiana. Por eso, permítanme compartir con ustedes 3 grandes avances. Primero, hemos logrado crear el Ministerio de Igualdad y Equidad con una oferta de servicios de apoyo para las personas con discapacidad que incluirá la asistencia personal, las tecnologías de asistencia y apoyo financiero para la autonomía económica. 2. Hemos creado el Fondo para la Superación de Brechas de Desigualdad e Inequidad, con el cual se asignarán recursos para aumentar la educación inclusiva, la inclusión laboral y para implementar un plan nacional de accesibilidad. 3. Hemos creado el Sistema Nacional de Cuidado. El Estado reconoce los roles de cuidado como un trabajo no remunerado. Aquí nos aseguraremos de articular el recientemente creado Sistema Nacional de Cuidado con el antiguo y ya por más de 2 décadas el Sistema Nacional de Discapacidad. Trabajamos por el reconocimiento social de dos sujetos de derecho, las personas con discapacidad y las personas que se reconocen como cuidadoras. Hay que hacer más, como lo planteó ayer el presidente de la Asamblea General. Es por ello que instamos a los Estados partes de la Convención, a la comunidad internacional y a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil a trabajar conjuntamente, como lo indica nuestra señora vicepresidenta Francia Márquez en Colombia, hasta que la dignidad de las personas con discapacidad.
Thank you. The next speaker on my list is Chile. Please.
Muy buenas tardes a todas las personas y también, señor presidente. En los 13 años de existencia del Servicio Nacional de Discapacidad en Chile, se ha generado una serie de políticas y programas e iniciativas que van en directo beneficio de las personas con discapacidad. Gracias a un trabajo conjunto con nuestro Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores y colaborando con otros países de Iberoamérica, hemos asumido este año la presidencia del Programa Iberoamericano de Discapacidad, además de coordinar desde el año 2023 el Grupo de Países Amigos de las Personas con Discapacidad de la Organización de Estados Americanos. Como país, fuimos sede de los Juegos Panamericanos Santiago 2023. La gran afluencia de público y su transmisión a través de televisión abierta demostró que existe un alto interés por el deporte de alto rendimiento de personas con discapacidad. Chile cuenta hoy con una importante infraestructura deportiva con estándares de accesibilidad universal, destacando la Villa Panamericana y Parapanamericana y el Centro de Entrenamiento Paralímpico. Nos enorgullece anunciar que Chile albergará los próximos Juegos Mundiales de Olimpiadas Especiales 2027, que por primera vez se harán en Latinoamérica. Por otro lado, el Ministerio de Desarrollo Social está implementando el Sistema Nacional de Apoyos y Cuidados, el cual pone en relevancia que las personas con discapacidad son también personas que cuidan, por lo que pone énfasis en las asistencias, apoyos y ayudas técnicas que se necesitan, sabiendo que la mayoría de las personas que apoyan y cuidan son mujeres. Otra temática importante es cómo las nuevas tecnologías han abierto un mundo de posibilidades para mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas con discapacidad, brindándoles herramientas, apoyos y adecuaciones para superar barreras y participar de manera plena, autónoma e independiente en la vida social. Las nuevas tecnologías también nos enfrentan a múltiples desafíos, como elevados costos, falta de accesibilidad, ausencia de datos, ciberseguridad y gestión segura de datos personales y sensibles. Es necesario entonces conocer cómo los Estados abordaremos el desafío de implementar la Convención considerando prácticas inclusivas e innovadoras que incorporen nuevas tecnologías y una mayor asequibilidad, considerando mecanismos de cooperación internacional, así como sector privado y sociedad civil. Siguiendo entonces la invitación de esta conferencia, nos sumamos a repensar la inclusión de la discapacidad bajo el prisma de estas nuevas tecnologías de la inteligencia artificial y de tecnologías de la información y la comunicación. Resulta entonces indispensable que avancemos en la cooperación internacional para promover innovaciones y transferencia tecnológica para el futuro inclusivo, considerando siempre a las personas con discapacidad y a sus organizaciones en todas las acciones de colaboración.
Thank you. Now we have representative of non-governmental organization, Women with Disabilities Australia. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here today representing Women with Disabilities Australia, ILGA World and ILGA Oceania. International cooperation to promote technology innovations need to be sensitive to the needs of all persons with disabilities, including women and girls and LGBTI persons. The Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disability has called on states to ensure that human rights-based and diversity, SOGIESC inclusive approaches to international cooperation. The CRPD Committee has also repeatedly stated that under the Convention, states must protect persons with disabilities from intersecting forms of discrimination and violence based on SOGIESC. The intersectional discrimination that women and girls experience is explicitly recognised in Article 6 of the Convention. This year, ILGA World published a report, Accessing Connection, Bridging the Digital Divide for LGBTI Communities Worldwide, looking at gaps and challenges for LGBTI advocacy and addressing disparities in internet access and digital inclusion. And the research conclusions are relevant for LGBTI persons with disabilities and those who experience marginalisations in relation to their sex or gender. Women and LGBTI people with disabilities face economic and access hurdles, including higher poverty, unemployment, precarious employment, lower device ownership, and compounded barriers due to the lack of universal design. The rapid digitalisation of ID platforms risks excluding women and girls and LGBTI people, especially those with disabilities and trans or gender diverse individuals, due to rigid designs and discriminatory practices. While artificial intelligence offers opportunities to improve accessibility for people with disabilities, biased training data and lack of inclusive design can cause harm, especially through gender-unaware design and biometric surveillance, highlighting the need for disability-inclusive AI development involving input from designers with disabilities. We cannot dismiss the fact that technology such as AI is increasingly becoming weaponised to silence those who would speak out against tyranny and human rights abuses. We've heard a number of stories of highly sexualised AI-generated images of female advocates being sent to male leaders of their community, placing them at risk of public executions, forcing them into exile and silencing other leaders lest they be targeted next. Authoritarian governments are using AI to enhance and refine their online censorship and block websites that remove disfavoured political and social speech. In some ways, the keyboard has become more dangerous and more effective than a bullet or a bomb. Together, we are calling for greater collaboration between governments, NGOs, and tech companies. This is vital to bridge the digital divide and improve online safety and accessibility for women and LGBT.
Thank you. Now I hand over to Romania. Please, the floor is yours.
Honorable Chair, Your Excellencies, Romania associates itself with a statement delivered on behalf of the EU. Allow me to make a few remarks in my national capacity and extend my delegation's gratitude for the opportunity presented by the 17th session of the conference to reflect on the evolving global landscape as we strive to ensure effective participation of persons with disabilities in society, and looking forward to the Summit of the Future and the World Social Summit. Romania remains steadfast in its commitment to advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. The Ministry of Labour and Social Solidarity coordinates at the central level the activities for protecting and pushing on the rights of persons with disabilities, ensuring the monitoring of regulation implementation in its domain. Through the national strategy, we continue to progress in implementing the CRPD, striving to provide the framework for the full and equal exercise of all fundamental rights and freedoms. The main objective of our strategy is to ensure the comprehensive and effective participation of persons with disabilities rooted in the freedom of life across all spheres of life within an accessible and desired environment aligned with the priority areas of the EU strategy. Persons with disability must receive adequate support to foster independent living within families and through high-quality alternative community services. To realize this goal, we aim to enhance inclusion and access to social services and social professional opportunities. This involves the development of active policies to promote formal employment and improve the quality and impact of social assistance services. It also entails active measures within the social economic sector. In line with these objectives, in recent years, the Romanian government, supported by the EU, have subsidized the acquisition of assistive technology. We are working closely with experts and organizations, including the World Bank and representative NGOs, to achieve our shared objectives. Our administrative system includes a completely independent body called Council of the Implementation of the CRPD, whose reports are a valuable resource in our regulatory activities. Moreover, in the light of the extensive social assistance reforms undertaken by the Romanian government last year, we grant the imperative of duly training personnel tasked with effectively implementing these reforms. We recognize the transformative potential of technology to enhance the lives of persons with disabilities, while also acknowledging the potential risks and challenges they may face if technological usage is not grounded in human rights. Persons with disabilities are often over-impacted in situations of risk, including humanitarian emergencies, armed conflict, disasters, and the adverse effects of climate change. In this regard, the Romanian government has constantly provided assistance and support where and when needed. In conclusion, fostering international partnership is pivotal in surmounting access barriers and by addressing their underlying causes. A comprehensive approach involving all international actors is imperative to address these systemic challenges and to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker on our list is from South Africa. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. South Africa aligns itself with the statements of the Group of Friends on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as the LGBTI core group. Mr. Chair, as we move towards the Summit of the Future, it is imperative that we reevaluate our approach to disability inclusion in the global landscape. In doing so, we must recognize the intersectionality of disability with technology, humanitarian emergencies, decent work, and sustainable livelihoods. Firstly, technology has the power to revolutionize the lives of persons with disabilities. However, access to these advancements remains unequal, perpetuating the digital divides. We must prioritize the development and implementation of inclusive technologies that empower individuals of all abilities, ensuring equal access to education, employment, and social participation. Secondly, humanitarian emergencies disproportionately affect persons with disabilities, exacerbating existing inequalities. As we navigate crises, we must prioritize inclusive emergency responses that address the unique needs of individuals with disabilities, ensuring access to essential services, assistive devices, and psychosocial support. And thirdly, decent work is a fundamental right that must be extended to all, particularly persons with disabilities. Yet they continue to face barriers in accessing employment opportunities, facing discrimination and limited accommodations. We must promote inclusive labor policies, provide skills training, and foster supportive workplace environments that enable persons with disabilities to fully participate in the workforce. Lastly, sustainable livelihoods are integral to ensuring long-term well-being and the independence for persons with disabilities. By promoting entrepreneurship, vocational training, and access to financial resources, we can empower individuals to build resilient livelihoods that contribute to both their personal fulfillment and the economic prosperity of their communities. As we chart the course for the future, let us commit to a paradigm shift in our approach to disability inclusion, one that is grounded in the principles of equity, accessibility, and empowerment. By harnessing the transformative potential of technology, addressing the unique challenges posed by humanitarian emergencies, promoting inclusive employment opportunities, and fostering sustainable livelihoods, we can create a world where all individuals, regardless of their ability, can thrive and contribute to a more just and inclusive society. In conclusion, let us seize this moment to reaffirm our commitment to disability inclusion and pave the way for a future where every individual has the opportunity to realize their full potential. Together, we can build a more inclusive world for generations to come. I thank you.
Thank you. I now invite the representative of Azerbaijan to make the speech. Thank you.
Dear committee members, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Azerbaijan. I am honored to address you on the topic of international cooperation to promote technology innovations and transfer for an inclusive future. Azerbaijan ratified the CRPD and its protocol in 2008 and has consistently reported on our progress. Our new law on the right of persons with disability, adopted in 2018, has led to 17 new legislative acts promoting disability rights and societal inclusion. Through a large-scale digitalization program, over 146 out of 159 social services have been transferred electronically, with 56 proactive services introduced since 2019. Our country has automated the awarding of disability benefits and pensions, making Azerbaijan the first in the region to use a proactive approach on such a scale. This electronic system is integrated databases and information sources from more than 80 governmental stakeholders, as well as the Ministry's centralized electronic information system, which guarantees sharing and use information and foster cooperation between state entities. This system not only simplifies access to the benefit, but also sets a benchmark for technological integration in social services. Furthermore, our collaboration with international experts has facilitated the adoption of cutting-edge technologies in rehabilitation and assistive device, significantly improving the quality of life persons with disabilities. We have established a register for persons with disability to maintain a comprehensive database, and government services are assessed annually based on new criteria, including those related to disability. These measures improve the transparency and accessibility of government services, fostering a more citizen-centric approach. Moreover, Azerbaijan is facing a significant issue on landmines, which have caused over 68 deaths and 293 injuries since the liberation of our territories. Despite our demining efforts, the demand for highly technological protests and assistive products remain high. We advocate for integrating mine victim assistance into public health care, an initiative for an 18th SDG on demining. In conclusion, we are committed to creating an inclusive environment for persons with disability. Our vision is a world all individuals enjoy safety, security, and full societal inclusion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is from Bangladesh. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bangladesh ratified the CRPD in 2007. The Constitution of Bangladesh guarantees equal rights and dignity of all citizens, including persons with disability, PWDs. We acceded the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled in 2022. Under the visionary leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and as a strong proponent of peaceful, just, and inclusive societies across the world, Bangladesh has been working to build an inclusive and digitally empowered smart Bangladesh by 2041. Our government has taken a number of legal and policy measures to ensure disability inclusive development. Promoting prosperity and fostering inclusiveness is the slogan of our flagship 8th Five-Year Plan 2022-2025. Mr. Chair, Bangladesh enacted the Rights and Protection of Persons with Disability Act 2013, a rule in 2015, and the National Action Plan for the Disabled in 2018 to implement the Act. We have also formulated the Neurodevelopmental Disability Protection Trust Act 2013 and the Children Act 2013, and have also developed a 5-year national strategic plan for neurodevelopmental disorder. Bangladesh successfully completed the National Survey on Persons with Disability in 2021 as a strong commitment to improving data on disability. We have included disability in our national education and skill development policies to ensure that no one is left behind. Our teachers are receiving regular training on inclusive education. Our government is rendering rehabilitation and therapy services through 103 service centers across the country and are distributing assistive devices to the persons with disability at free of cost. The government is running 12 special schools for children with autism across the country. We have planned to leverage technology-based skill development programs for the PWDs. Through our social safety net programs, the PWDs are receiving disability allowance. We are also conducting awareness programs for the parents and the caregivers. Our Building, Construction and Transportation Act have addressed disability, and PWDs have full access to the newly launched metro rail service. We are hosting 1.2 million forcibly displaced Rohingyas from Myanmar. The government, along with national and international actors, is implementing age and disability inclusive Rohingya response plans in the camps of Cox's Bazar and Vashanchor. We also express deep concern at the thousands of Palestinians, particularly the children in Gaza, facing lifelong disabilities caused by indiscriminate attacks by Israel. Despite good progress, we are aware of the remaining challenges, including finance, data, and capacity building. Climate change and digital divide have exacerbated vulnerabilities of PWDs. Digital tools to access information and financial support are critical for inclusion and meaningful participation of the PWDs in the economic, social, and cultural activities. For developing nations, international solidarity and cooperation is of key importance to overcome these challenges. We need to foster our unity ahead of the summit of the future to ensure protection and uphold the rights of the persons with disabilities to development. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Non-governmental organization Inclusion Canada is next on our list. Please, the floor is yours.
Distinguished delegates, I am Robin Acton, the past president of Inclusion Canada. We are building a Canada where people with intellectual disabilities and their families are valued equally and participate fully in all aspects of society. I am not a person with a disability, but disability is ever present in my life. Many times while raising my daughter, a kind and entrepreneurial woman with an intellectual disability, we leveraged rights mechanisms to support her inclusive life. And when my husband acquired a significant physical disability, we again relied on those mechanisms, including the CRPD, to return to a good life in community. I am torn about what picture of reality to paint for you today. I want so badly to tell you about the people with intellectual disabilities in Canada who are attending post-secondary education, or those who are not only employed but advancing in their careers, or about our province of New Brunswick's groundbreaking new Supported Decision-Making Act. These are hopeful tales I want to tell you, because hope inspires action, and when we see what is possible, we pursue it with fervor. Sadly, for you, the members of the UN General Assembly, I must paint a different and equally real picture. Canada's medical assistance in dying regime is available to everyone whose death is reasonably foreseeable. Only people with disabilities are able to access physician-assisted suicide when death is not reasonably foreseeable. On average, we have lost a person with a disability a day to physician-assisted suicide. For many who died, basic necessities like housing, income security, and adequate disability supports were not attainable. To make matters worse, the incoming Canada Disability Benefit, which promised to lift people with disabilities from poverty, seems unlikely to do so in the foreseeable future, leaving many people with disabilities in Canada in deep poverty. Consequently, alongside people with disabilities and their families, we will continue to be hopeful and expectant. We'll continue to hold Canada to account. We'll continue to push for change that eliminates the ableist practice of assisted suicide that is only for people with disabilities, and we will push our government to adequately fund the Canada Disability Benefit. We want a Canada where people with disabilities are supported to have a good life, not a state-funded death. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is from Burkina Faso. Please.
Monsieur le Président, distingués délégués, le thème général de la présente session engage les États parties à plus de réformes dans la perspective d'une meilleure application de la Convention relative aux droits des personnes handicapées. Pour sa part, le Burkina Faso met en œuvre des mesures et des politiques spécifiques et inclusives pour assurer le plein épanouissement de ce groupe de personnes. Déjà exposées aux violences de toutes sortes, ces personnes sont davantage impactées par les effets des changements climatiques et la crise sécuritaire et humanitaire consécutive aux attaques terroristes au Burkina. Ainsi, pour assurer leur protection, le Burkina Faso poursuit la mise en œuvre de sa stratégie nationale dédiée à ce groupe spécifique. Tenant compte de son contexte national particulier, le Burkina Faso a procédé à la signature d'une charte pour l'inclusion des personnes handicapées dans l'action humanitaire en août 2023. D'autres actions majeures ont par ailleurs été réalisées. Il s'agit notamment du renforcement des capacités de différents acteurs sur l'action humanitaire inclusive, mais également en matière d'utilisation du questionnaire du Washington Group sur les statistiques du handicap, de l'amélioration de la prise en compte des personnes handicapées dans les projets et programmes, de l'accentuation de la sensibilisation pour l'inclusion des personnes handicapées et de la lutte contre les pesanteurs socio-culturelles. En outre, le Burkina Faso a réalisé et diffusé les résultats d'une étude sur l'employabilité des personnes handicapées et a pris des dispositions pour améliorer leur accès à l'emploi et à la formation professionnelle, ainsi qu'à l'utilisation des technologies de l'information et de la communication en vue de leur inclusion numérique. Des personnes handicapées de toutes les régions ont également été dotées de matériel spécifique de mobilité adapté à leurs besoins. Monsieur le Président, distingués délégués, une inclusion réelle des personnes handicapées dans la conjoncture internationale actuelle ne peut se réaliser qu'à travers une solidarité agissante entre les différents pays Et le prochain sommet de l'avenir nous offre l'opportunité de repenser et de redynamiser notre multilatéralisme à cet effet. Le Burkina Faso reste disposé à œuvrer pour le renforcement de cette solidarité à l'échelle nationale et mondiale. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The next speaker from our list is from Mexico. Please, the floor is yours.
Presidente, México se ha caracterizado por ser un activo promotor de iniciativas dirigidas a la protección de los derechos humanos de las personas con discapacidad. En el ámbito multilateral, México asumió un papel de liderazgo en la creación de la convención que nos ocupa. Hemos continuado estos esfuerzos como copresidentes del grupo de amigos y cofacilitadores de la resolución de la Asamblea General sobre la aplicación de la citada convención, tareas que compartimos con Nueva Zelanda y de las cuales estamos orgullosos. Con el 20º aniversario de la adopción de la multicitada convención, celebramos los múltiples avances que al respecto se han logrado. Destacamos su función como base para avanzar hacia enfoques que priorizan los derechos humanos en foros multilaterales. Subrayamos también la importancia que tiene el Programa de Naciones Unidas para la promoción de los derechos de las personas con discapacidad en el esfuerzo por asistir a los estados en la aplicación de la Convención, y hacemos un llamado a que los estados incrementen su apoyo al fondo del programa. Nos complace el cambio de paradigma y de cultura institucional que ha incitado la convención a la que nos referimos aquí en Naciones Unidas, reflejado en el establecimiento de la Oficina del Relator Especial sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad y la Estrategia de Inclusión de la Discapacidad de las Naciones Unidas. Apoyamos plenamente la continuidad de estas iniciativas a fin de que la discapacidad sea un componente del trabajo de todos los mecanismos de Naciones Unidas. Atender la interseccionalidad de los retos a los que se enfrentan las personas con discapacidad es una prioridad para México. Recalcamos la importancia de integrar una perspectiva de género a toda política relacionada con los derechos de las personas con discapacidad. Señor Presidente, a pesar de los importantes avances, aún queda mucho por hacer para garantizar la plena implementación de la Convención. En este sentido, concluyo haciendo un llamado a todos los Estados miembros a hacer
Thank you. Thank you. Now I hand over to China to make a statement. Please, the floor is yours.
主席先生，中国有8500万残疾人，中国政府以人民为中心，采取措施，切实履行公约，促进残疾人事务融合发展。我们通过科学立法和严格执法，确保残疾人事务融入国家总体发展规划，成为经济社会文化发展的有机组成部分，努力不让一个残疾人掉队。去年9月，国家又最新颁布实施《无障碍环境建设法》，截至2020年底，710万农村贫困残疾人摆脱绝对贫困。目前，国家正努力促进他们的可持续发展，确保不返贫。我们建立困难残疾人生活补贴、重度残疾人护理补贴、残疾儿童康复服务等专项保障制度，惠及2700多万残疾人。我们大力推动教育模式转型， 大力发展融合教育，让残疾学生和小伙伴们一起学习，为残疾学生参加普通高校提供合理便利。近年来，每年都有3万多名残疾学生被普通高等院校录取。我们拓展渠道，促进残疾人高质量就业，推动残疾人经济赋权。国家制定促进残疾人就业3年行动方案，正在修订残疾人就业条例，开展促进残疾妇女就业的美丽工坊项目等，让残疾人有尊严的生活。我们重视科技研发和应用，通过数字技术、人工智能等减少残疾人融入社会的障碍。我们积极开展竞技体育和群众体育，促进残疾人康复健身、丰富生活，实现价值。我们高度重视残疾人和残疾人组织代表性。现在全国各级人大代表和政协委员中有6000多名残疾人、残疾人亲友和残疾人工作者，他们在政治生活中表达意见、参与决策。我们呼吁各缔约国拿出政治意愿，确保履约政策落地。我们愿加强国际交流合作，共同为残疾人过上美好幸福生活而努力。谢谢。
Thank you. Delegate from EMN is next in our list. You have the floor.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. اسمحوا لي بداية أن أعرب عن تقديرنا للجهود المبذولة لتحضير هذه الدورة، ولا يفوتنا تهنئة جميع أعضاء المكتب على انتخابهم مع التمنيات لهم بالتوفيق والنجاح. السيد الرئيس، تؤمن الجمهورية اليمنية بالمساواة بين جميع المواطنين في الحقوق والواجبات العامة، بما في ذلك الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة كجزء لا يتجزأ من المجتمع اليمني. فكانت اليمن من أوائل الدول التي صادقت على الاتفاقية المعنية بحقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة. ورغم الظروف الصعبة التي تمر بها البلاد، تواصل الحكومة اليمنية جهودها للوفاء بالتزاماتها تجاه تحقيق الأهداف المنصوصة عليها في هذه الاتفاقية. يولي صندوق رعاية وتأهيل المعاقين بإشراف من وزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية والعمل اهتماما خاصا بتقديم الرعاية الصحية والتعليمية للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في المحافظات المحررة. ففي العام 2023 تم افتتاح العديد من المراكز التأهيلية وتقديم خدمات الرعاية الاجتماعية والدعم النفسي والمجتمعي، وبناء قدرات العاملين في المؤسسات الحكومية على كيفية التعامل مع هذه الفئة لتعزيز مساواة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة بغيرهم ودمجهم في المجتمع وضمان حياة كريمة لهم. السيد الرئيس، لا يزال المدنيون في اليمن يواجهون تهديدات متزايدة من الألغام الأرضية والقذائف والأجسام المتفجرة التي زرعتها الميليشيات الحوثية الإرهابية في الطرقات والأراضي الزراعية والأحياء السكنية، تسببت في سقوط مئات الضحايا من قتلى أو إعاقات جسدية مستدامة، ولا سيما النساء والأطفال، مما خلفت تبعات اقتصادية وصدمات نفسية بالغة على حياة الأفراد المصابين وأسرهم. في ظل انعقاد هذا المؤتمر تتجه الأنظار إلى الظروف المأساوية التي يعيشها الفلسطينيون، بما في ذلك من ذوي الإعاقة في قطاع غزة، جراء العدوان الإسرائيلي الغاشم والمتواصل في ظل الاعتداءات والانتهاكات الجسيمة التي ترتكبها قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في انتهاك صارخ للقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. ونطالب بذلك المجتمع الدولي التحرك الفوري لوقف إطلاق النار في قطاع غزة ووقف جرائم الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ومحاسبة مرتكبي هذه الجرائم الوحشية. في الختام، تؤكد الحكومة اليمنية التزامها الثابت بتعزيز الجهود المبذولة لدعم الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة وأصحاب الهمم. كما تؤكد الحكومة اليمنية وحرصها على تحقيق السلام الشامل والمستدام المبني على مرجعيات الحل السياسي المتفق عليها، وإنهاء الحرب التي شنتها الميليشيات الحوثية ضد تطلعات الشعب اليمني والتوافق الوطني، ورفع المعاناة الإنسانية وضمان حصول هذه الفئة على سبل الرعاية اللازمة وتنفيذ مشاريع تنموية تعزز دورهم في المجتمع. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you. The next speaker is a delegate from Kyrgyzstan. Please, the floor is yours.
Distinguished colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, there are more than 213,000 people with disabilities in Kyrgyzstan, which is 3% of the total population. Assistance and support for such people, creating a comfortable environment and favorable conditions for them that contribute to a full, dignified life, is a moral duty of the state and one of the indicators of the maturity of society. This is a priority task of the state at all levels. State programs, individual projects, and social support measures are aimed at this. Thus, the state guarantees social protection in the form of social payments, home and institutional services, provision of vouchers for treatment, as well as a technical special means for rehabilitation. According to the Labor Code, standards have been approved for all allocation of job quotas for people with disabilities in the amount of at least 5% of the number of employees, if the number of employees at least 20 people. At the same time, part-time work is allowed to be provided in the calculation of this standard. In accordance with the legislation on employment promotion, persons with disabilities have priority in obtaining vocational training, retraining, and advanced training. In addition, the state is making efforts to expand the rights and opportunities of persons with disabilities through digitalization, which offers a few opportunities for more equal participation in the labor market and entrepreneurship. Persons with disabilities are actively involved in the decision-making process regarding the observance of the rights of persons with disabilities. Thus, we have established a council for persons with disabilities under the Cabinet of Ministers of the Kyrgyz Republic. The council is headed by the chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers of the Kyrgyz Republic, and his deputy is a representative of civil society. Thus, all issues at the council are considered jointly with representatives of persons with disabilities, and joint decisions are made. Dear colleagues, Kyrgyzstan ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2019. We fully share the principles of the convention and are ready for the comprehensive and step-by-step solution to the existing problems. To implement the convention, Kyrgyzstan adopted a state program for persons with disabilities and other low mobility groups of the population for 2023 and 2030 called Accessible Country, and a separate action plan for 23-26 to implement its objectives. The program is aimed at eliminating discrimination against persons with disabilities in various spheres of public life and creating accessible infrastructure in the cities, districts, and villages of the Republic. The state program is aimed at implementing 6 priorities: improving the system.
Thank you. I hand over to the non-governmental organization, the Leprosy Mission International. Please, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, as a person affected by leprosy, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address you at the CRPD conference today. I want to use this opportunity to ask you to remember 3 things. Remember leprosy, remember persons affected by leprosy, and remember organizations of persons affected by leprosy. First, remember leprosy. Many people have the impression that leprosy is an ancient disease, and it might seem incongruous to speak about it at a modern human rights conference at the United Nations. Sadly, leprosy still exists across much of Asia, Africa, and South America. Although it's curable, leprosy still dehumanizes. It still causes people to be rejected by their families and society. And it still means that a person affected by leprosy struggle to access the rights that they are due under the CRPD. Across the world, there are 4 million people living with disability because of leprosy, and many millions more who live with what the UN's former Special Rapporteur on Leprosy Discrimination has called the impairing effects of leprosy-related stigmatization. So first, let's start by remembering that leprosy exists and it deserves its place within the CRPD. Second, remember persons affected by leprosy. When we meet together and write political declarations and talk about including the underrepresented in policy and programs, persons affected by leprosy are so underrepresented that they do not even make the list of people who are considered underrepresented. When you are designing policy and drafting political declarations, please remember that there are millions of people affected by leprosy who are looking to have their voices heard and their needs met. The Summit of the Future would be a good place to start. Third, remember organizations of persons affected by leprosy. This point is crucial. Persons affected by leprosy are not a passive group who are hoping their rights will be recognized. They are human rights campaigners who are organized and searching for opportunities to have their voices heard and their rights achieved. Across the world, there are organizations of persons affected by leprosy who have worked their way from humble beginnings to become professional organizations. They have helped their communities through the darkest days of the pandemic and have earned the respect of the local level that few in this room could even dream of. As we seek to localize the CRPD, organizations of persons affected by leprosy are untapped potential for other OPDs, for civil society, and for governments. Remember this. Seek out our leaflet about them, which is among the other leaflets in Conference Room 4, and come and speak to me or to my colleagues so that we can forge new.
Thank you. Now I invite the delegate from Sweden. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Sweden fully aligns itself with the statement made by the EU and its member states, the joint statement of the Group of Friends of Persons with Disabilities, and the joint statement by the LGBTI core group. We are living in challenging times. The impact of COVID-19 is still with us. We are being exposed to serious and organized crime, terrorist threats, and cyber attacks. With Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Europe is facing its biggest security challenge since the Second World War. And meanwhile, many other crises are devastating individuals and communities elsewhere in the world. It is not easy to handle all these challenges, and when it comes to accessible crisis preparedness and crisis information, we can do better. We know that persons with disability often face a higher risk in times of crisis. It is therefore crucial that the governments and decision makers consult and actively involve persons with disabilities, including through their representative organizations in the development and implementation of national and local crisis response strategies, and when developing protection and support system. One thing that we have learned in Sweden is that in times of crisis, it is absolutely essential that we provide adaptive, accessible information to all. Our emergency response was severely tested during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we quickly became aware of the flaws in our system, such as the lack of accessible communication and information material. As the situation was new, gathering information became a crucial part of the work of the Swedish government and the government agencies in order to understand what was working and what was not. Against this background, it may not come as a surprise that crisis preparedness was identified as one of the 12 prioritized areas in our national disability strategy. Of course, meetings with the Swedish disability movement also provided an indispensable source of knowledge for both the Swedish government and the responsible government agencies. But it is also important to learn from other countries. How can we share expertise and experiences? I hope that we can continue to share experience and knowledge on this topic in order to make crisis preparedness as accessible as possible in our respective countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is from Denmark. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Denmark aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities plays a crucial role when developing new policy. Denmark ratified the Convention in 2009, and by doing this, we committed ourselves to ensure that both existing and future policy must comply with the Convention.
Denmark is continually working to promote the full realization of the rights of persons with disabilities, to continually strengthen the support and care that persons with disabilities need to improve their quality of life and to have equal possibilities to live independent lives. And there are both achievements and challenges to be found in this work when it comes to the overarching theme of the conference. In Denmark, we have in many ways a well-functioning welfare system where persons with disabilities receive the assistance they are entitled to. However, the disability sector is today affected by some of fundamental and structural challenges. This includes rising costs in the municipalities and pressure on the experience quality of the service, legal security, and the trust towards the municipalities. To counteract this, the Danish government has recently entered into an agreement with several political parties consisting of 25 new initiatives. The overall purpose of the agreement is to ensure an economically sustainable and high-quality development of the disability sector by focusing on prevention, development, as well as the well-being and inclusion of persons with disabilities. The agreement includes an action plan that aims to establish better opportunities for persons with disabilities in the workforce and to ensure more flexible ways to be involved in the education system. In addition, the agreement aims to ensure that the employees at secured residential accommodations have the necessary education and competences when working with some of the persons that need it the most. Another initiative consists of a plan for the specialized social services in the disability sector by dividing the area into separate specialized areas. The aim is, by gathering more knowledge and competences, to ensure highly specialized services for people with highly specialized needs, enhance the quality, and establish a better match between complex needs and the help offered. Central NGOs in the disability field and organizations representing persons with disabilities in the new dialogue forum, United on Disability, have been included in the work process and framing of the agreement by providing new solutions, relevant knowledge, and different perspectives. The Conference of State Parties is a unique platform to share these experiences and gain knowledge on how to solve some of the challenges we encounter. As we look ahead, the Summit of the Future provide opportunities for states to reaffirm their commitment to protecting the human rights of all individuals, including persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker for today's session is a delegate from Kenya. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies and distinguished delegates. Kenya is honored to participate in the 17th session of the Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Chairperson, this year's conference theme aligns with Kenya's constitution at the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Kenya is committed to disability inclusion, implementing policies to improve livelihoods and economically empower persons with disabilities while protecting their rights. Climate change significantly impacts persons with disabilities, exacerbating inequalities and increasing their vulnerability. To mitigate climate change effects, Kenya has enhanced disaster preparedness and promoted inclusive resilience building and displacement management. Kenya intends to plant 15 billion trees by 2032. We are implementing a community-focused climate action program, ensuring 90% of funding supports vulnerable populations, including persons with disability. Our humanitarian innovation program addresses data, system, and solution gaps to include children with disabilities and their families in humanitarian crisis. Distinguished delegates, the World Health Organization estimates that 2.5 billion people need assistive technology, yet only 10% of those in low-income countries have access to it. To address this, Kenya has developed a rehabilitative services and assistive technology strategy for 2022 to 2026. It's our roadmap for targeted investments to promote access to assistive devices for persons with disabilities, enabling their full participation in society. Additionally, Kenya has and its partners conducted an assessment on the support needs of persons with disabilities and their caregivers. This has led to the development of gender-responsive programs that provide respite care and strengthen community support systems. Chairperson, in response to SDG number 8 on decent work and economic growth for all, Kenya has enrolled 4,600 trainees with disabilities in relevant courses and developed a career portal accessed by 5,700 individuals, significantly enhancing employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. Despite efforts by the government of Kenya to address the well-being of persons with disabilities, inadequate funding remains a challenge. We urge state parties to ensure CRPD compliant programming and budgeting to effectively achieve.
Thank you. With this, I announce the suspension of the general debate, which shall be continued as scheduled during the morning meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. and shall begin with a statement by Algeria. All delegations are invited to consult the updated live list of speakers for the general debate. I now call for a housekeeping break for 5 minutes and invite panelists of Roundtable 2 to take their seats at the podium. Thank you. Excellencies, please take your seats. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I call to order Roundtable 2 entitled Persons with Disabilities in Situations of Risk and Humanitarian Emergencies. I have the pleasure to co-chairing this roundtable along with my civil society colleague, Mr. Pratma Gurung, President of the National Indigenous Disabled Women Association, Nepal. As an indigenous woman with disability from the Global South, Ms. Gurung has been working on the issues of gender, disability, indigenous peoples, and youth at the nexus of climate change and disasters at both the regional and national level. She has been engaged with COSP since 2016 and has been working on climate change since 2015, raising the calls for disability-inclusive climate actions through national research-based advocacy. To introduce myself, my name is Niko Tatulashvili. I have been an advisor on human rights to the Prime Minister of Georgia since 2021, and I'm also currently co-chairing the Human Rights Council of Georgia. I previously served as the head of the International Relations Department in the Office of Public Defender of Georgia, as well as chairperson of the Financial Committee in the European Network of National Human Rights Institutions. With an extensive academic background in law, I'm currently an associate professor at the International Black Sea University of Georgia. Today, together with Ms. Gurung, we will facilitate this roundtable discussion on the urgent and pertinent issues of persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get started, I would first like to present you with some background information to lay the groundwork for today's discussion. This year's conference takes place under the overarching theme of rethinking disability inclusion in the current international juncture and ahead of the summit of the future. Indeed, the current international juncture is marked by complex global crisis with far-reaching and profound ramifications affecting all aspects of sustainable development, a consequence of rising armed conflict, rising global temperatures, increasing disease outbreaks and health emergencies, as well as devastating climate-induced disasters which ravage crops, livelihood, and homes. Distinguished panelists, delegates, and partners. In this challenging context, the rights, voices, and contributions of persons with disabilities in all their diversity must be protected, promoted, and strengthened. Disability inclusion is a cornerstone of the landmark Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which provides legal and normative guidance to governments, international organizations, civil society, and beyond to ensure that all persons with disabilities, irrespective of their age, gender, ethnicity, or type or severity of disability, enjoy their rights and freedoms on an equal basis with others, most crucially in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. Specifically, the CRPD under Article 11 calls upon the state parties to take, in accordance with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of persons with disabilities in situations of risk, such as situations of armed conflict, humanitarian emergencies, and the occurrence of natural disasters. Yet, far too often, the situation for persons with disabilities in such context remains dire. Owing to higher rates of multidimensional poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition, poor physical and mental health, as well as entrenched stigma and discrimination, persons with disabilities are particularly vulnerable to the effects of conflict, climate change, and health emergencies. Thus, persons with disabilities tend to be disproportionately affected both during and in the aftermath of situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies, suffering greater material losses, being more likely to be left behind in emergency responses, and suffering higher mortality rates than persons without disabilities. Moreover, persons with disabilities remain underrepresented and underserved by disaster risk reduction planning, policies, and management at all stages of preparedness, response, and recovery. For instance, evacuation measures that are non-disability inclusive, such as inaccessible transport or emergency shelters, stymie persons with disabilities opportunities to evacuate or flee. Lamentably, disability inclusion in disaster risk reduction remains under-resourced and under-prioritized. Progress is uneven and too slow, and the inclusion of persons with disabilities and/or their representative organizations in planning and policy making is limited. Ladies and gentlemen, adopting a disability-inclusive and human rights-based approach to disaster risk management at all stages enables persons with disabilities to actively shape and contribute to policy, planning, and implementation on an equal basis with others, as well as ensuring accountability and respect for the human rights of persons with disabilities. Such an approach will also lead to more effective policies and measures to combat the rising threats of conflict, climate change, and health emergencies. Global challenges and shared threats require global and shared responses. Bolstering partnerships between governments, humanitarian organizations, and organizations of persons with disabilities, investing in capacity building initiatives, and promoting regional and local adaptations of international guidelines and toolkits, conducting research and data collection, and strengthening grassroots and community-based initiatives led by persons with disabilities are just some key steps towards achieving disability-inclusive preparedness, response, and recovery so that the safety and protection of persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies can be guaranteed. Dear colleagues, friends, this roundtable seeks to further discuss and expand on measures, promising practices, and actionable policies which will pave the road towards safeguarding the rights of persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. Without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce and extend a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists. Ms. Gunta Anka, Latvian Umbrella Body for Disability Organizations, Latvia. Mr. Anderson Henao Oroso, Ministry of Equality and Equity of Colombia. Ms. Virginia Gamba, Office of the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. Mr. Vakar Puri, Transforming Communities for Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities, Global, Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, we will shortly invite each of our panelists to deliver their presentation for 10 minutes to share their thoughts and insights on this crucial issue. Following this presentation, we will invite delegations and observers to participate in an interactive discussion through Q&A session, to pose questions to the panel or to make brief comments that are relevant and may contribute to the discussion of this roundtable. Participants who wish to take the floor are invited to press the button on their desk after the chair opens the floor. When given the floor, please unmute your microphone and identify yourself and your delegation or organization before posing your question or comments. Please note that all interventions are strictly limited to 2 minutes with no exception, in order to ensure the discussion is interactive and to allow for wide participation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now hand over to Ms. Pratima Gurung, Civil Society Co-Chair. Over to you, Ms. Gurung.
Thank you, Mr. Tatulali. Dear colleagues, it is my great honor to introduce and invite our first panelist, Ms. Gunta Anka, Latvian Umbrella Body for Disability Organizations, to the floor. Ms. Anka is a seasoned disability rights activist with extensive experience who has chaired the Latvian Umbrella Body for Disability Organizations, SUSENTO, since 2002. In addition, since 2005, Ms. Anka has been an active member of the European Disability Forum and currently serves as a vice president. Ms. Anka's lived experience as a wheelchair user further informs her perspectives and understanding of the challenges faced by persons with disabilities, and she has served as an advisor to the Disability Rights Fund, a collaboration between the donors and the disability community to advance the CRPD. Ms. Anka, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes time. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm really happy to be here today to talk with you more about the situation of persons with disabilities in situation of risks and humanitarian emergencies. I'm going to talk more about Ukraine. And do you know why? I'm sure many of you maybe have never heard about a very small country near to the Baltic Sea, but this small country is also near to the Ukraine and Russia. And it means that we have really emergency situation, not only in Ukraine, but also in our countries. We have many people with disabilities coming to Latvia and asking for help. I would like to say you in a few words some stories and some conclusions of those stories to let you know exactly how it works. And my first information is just some data about situation. There are 16% in general persons with disabilities in the world, and the mortality of us, of persons with disabilities, is 4 times higher than normally for people without disabilities. And of course, women and girls with disabilities are among the most impacted, together with persons with psychosocial disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and deaf-blind persons. And now some stories. The first one is about Irina. She is on a wheelchair, and she is a professional archer. When the war started in Ukraine, she was very far away. She was in Dubai to take part in competition. But her son with disabilities, he was at home in Ukraine. He was 16 years old, and Irina said that son with disabilities wasn't home alone, and nobody knows how to help them without parents being together at the moment. What are what we should learn from those situations? We need to prepare very concrete evacuation plans, and we need those plans not only for a governmental level, but also for a local level, to let everybody knows how to organize evacuation, and to know exactly how persons with disabilities should be included in these evacuation plans. We need to strengthen local organizations to provide them information how to react in such kind of situations. We need to train people to be ready to assist to persons with disabilities. And we heard already about inaccessible transport, inaccessible shelters, inaccessible places where persons with disabilities should stay for 1, 2, 5 or even more days during the evacuation time. And the next story. And the next story is about Olga and Roman, and they both are deaf. They both are deaf, and they said when the I-ride siren starting, they can't hear anything. And sometimes, Olga said, sometimes we'd see people running around, and we wouldn't know what was going on. We want to run too, but where? So the information is not accessible. We need to establish clear and reliable communication channels to be absolutely sure that all people timely can get information about emergency situation. Government need to implement multiple modes of alert systems, such as visual alarm, text messages, vibration alarms, to let everyone know when the emergency situation is coming, and to let them people know how to react in those situations. We need also establish mechanism to monitor and enforce the implementation of inclusive emergency systems. And the next one story I'd like to tell you is about Anton. He has autism and severe epilepsy. He's 20 years old and lives together with his mother. Anton left eastern Ukraine and go to Poland. Anton is very sensitive to the noise and crowds. And evacuation, of course, there is always noise and crowds around. And in fact, he is not able to go back because of he was not able to stay there because he said he need to see his cat. Cat is the only friend to Anton's. What's going on? How we can help? We need to understand how crucial it is to provide adequate mental health and emotional support to persons with disabilities during emergency situations. We need essential medical treatment and essential medicine in those places where people are staying. We need evacuation plans to consider the specific needs of persons with disabilities are taken into account. We need to recreate a stable environment as much as possible. And of course, I need to say that war in Ukraine, and I'm sure also war in Gaza at the moment, puts persons with disabilities in very, very, very bad situations. And we have to understand that each state need their own evacuation plans, their own plans where people with disabilities are included. Each local community need plans how people with disabilities could be included. And of course, we need also plans how we can refugees with disabilities accommodate in our countries. We need inclusive, accessible, comprehensive emergency preparedness and response plans that cater to the specific needs of each individuals with disabilities. We still have a lot of work to do, and we need to do it together. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Gunta Anka for her excellent presentation. Our next speaker will be Mr. Edinson Henrio Oreso of the Ministry of Equality and Equity of Colombia. Mr. Oreso is the Director for the Guarantee of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities at the Ministry of Equality and Equity of Colombia. A social worker by background, he has been as an activist for the rights of persons with disabilities for 22 years, participating in the Colombian Coalition for the Implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. He has worked in the public and humanitarian sectors, focusing on the victim of Colombian armed conflict, refugees, migrants with disabilities, and his research covers disability in various fields such as armed conflict, humanitarian mobility, and human rights. Mr. Oreso, welcome to the panel, and the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias a los colegas, las colegas panelistas, mil gracias al auditorio, muchísimas gracias por escuchar estas reflexiones y sobre todo por permitirnos hablar desde Colombia sobre las emergencias y riesgos humanitarios. Y es que Colombia, infortunadamente, tiene mucha experiencia en emergencias humanitarias. Colombia, como ustedes lo saben, es el segundo país más biodiverso del mundo y está siendo afectado por el cambio climático. Colombia ha vivido más de 6 décadas en medio de un conflicto armado que ha dejado más de 9 millones de personas víctimas, de las cuales más de 400.000 personas han sido personas con discapacidad. La discapacidad en Colombia por los distintos actores armados ha sido utilizada como arma de guerra. Hay en este momento más de 13.000 víctimas de minas antipersonal, de las cuales más del 60% son sobrevivientes víctimas con discapacidad. Se han ejecutado en Colombia extrajudicialmente a personas con discapacidad para hacerlos pasar como combatientes o actores armados. Colombia es un país de recepción y tránsito de población migrante. Hay en este momento más de 3 millones de personas refugiadas y migrantes en Colombia. Hay más de 9 millones de personas en Colombia en situación de desplazamiento interno. Todo esto nos ha dejado unas lecciones en clave de la implementación del artículo 11 de la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad. Y es que la acción gubernamental tiene que estar basada en 5 principios, sugerimos nosotros, para que puedan tener en cuenta en el marco de las emergencias y riesgos humanitarios como los que estamos considerando. El primer principio, y es que tiene que ver con la protección de la vida. Toda vida vale, decimos en Colombia, toda vida vale. Y esto a propósito del fantasma que circuló en el marco del COVID-19 sobre cuáles vidas priorizar, si la de las personas con discapacidad o de las personas sin discapacidad. En los marcos de la guerra hay vidas con menos valor o vidas inválidas. Otro de los principios es el principio ético en la atención humanitaria y en la ayuda humanitaria. El principio ético, diría un filósofo judío alemán, Emmanuel Levinas, la ética es como el insomnio, no duerme mientras la vida del otro está en riesgo. El tercer principio que hemos aprendido es la corresponsabilidad de las organizaciones que representan a las personas con discapacidad. Estamos hablando puntualmente del artículo 4, numeral 3 de la Convención. El cuarto principio, tiene que ver con la creación de políticas públicas y respuestas de los gobiernos precisamente en el marco del artículo 11 de la Convención, en su implementación. El quinto artículo, y de esto hemos aprendido muchísimo, y de esto hay países aquí amigos en el marco de la cooperación internacional. Hemos gozado del apoyo de ustedes en estas emergencias humanitarias, no solamente de países, sino de organizaciones no gubernamentales internacionales. Debemos seguir trabajando entonces, y es otra de las lecciones, en el enfoque inclusivo, interseccional y de discapacidad en la atención humanitaria, en las distintas etapas de la gestión humanitaria, para conocer el riesgo, y esto tiene que ver con información accesible, dirigida a las personas con discapacidad, en el reconocimiento de la diversidad y la interseccionalidad de las personas que son afectadas por las emergencias humanitarias, en la prevención del riesgo. Esto tiene que ver con la definición de rutas de atención accesibles e inclusivas, el manejo del riesgo con una respuesta, como ya lo he dicho, interseccional e inclusiva, y con la aplicación de enfoques análogos o similares a el que utiliza la ayuda humanitaria de las organizaciones internacionales, que tiene que ver con la prevención del daño o la acción sin daño en la ayuda humanitaria. Esto significa que los actores comprometidos con la protección y la ayuda humanitaria deben tener en cuenta que también en el manejo del riesgo es posible hacer daño si se desconoce la singularidad de las personas con discapacidad, que se puede evitar el daño en las intervenciones cuando se reconoce a la población con discapacidad, que se puede mitigar el daño cuando se reconocen y se identifican los efectos de la ayuda humanitaria, y que debemos reparar los daños también cuando se dignifican los derechos y la vida de las personas con discapacidad. Casi que podríamos mencionar un decálogo sobre recomendaciones desde nuestra experiencia colombiana. Sabemos que se requieren hacer diagnósticos en la planificación de la ayuda humanitaria cuando se trata, por ejemplo, de comunidades indígenas o pueblos étnicos, donde también, por supuesto, está la población con discapacidad. Que debemos reconocer, ya lo he dicho, información de los beneficiarios de la ayuda humanitaria. Esto significa datos inclusivos también. Debemos respetar los usos, costumbres y cosmogonías. Debemos consultar a las organizaciones sociales de las comunidades indígenas y de la población con discapacidad. Que debemos evitar en la ayuda humanitaria caer en el asistencialismo y principalmente trabajar el empoderamiento de las personas con discapacidad. Que debemos reconocer y respetar la autonomía y la vida independiente de las personas con discapacidad en el marco de las ayudas humanitarias. Que debemos prevenir la discriminación y otras formas de discriminación, edad, sexo, orientación sexual, género, etcétera, cuando se ofrece apoyo de ayuda humanitaria. Que debemos garantizar la accesibilidad en las ayudas humanitarias y que debemos visibilizar a la población con discapacidad subrepresentada de la población con discapacidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Oroso, for your contribution. Now it is my honor to present our next panelist, Ms. Virginia Gamba, the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. Ms. Gamba has previously served as an Assistant Secretary General, Head of the Joint Investigative Mechanism in Syria, as well as a Deputy of the High Representative for the Disarmament Affairs and the Director of the Office of the Disarmament Affairs, bringing more than 30 years of experiences and the professional leadership on issues relating with the disarmament and peace, human rights and security. Ms. Gamba, the floor is yours.
Distinguished chairs, excellencies, dear colleagues, I am grateful for the opportunity to speak at this roundtable dedicated to the crucial question of persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies, taking place in the context of the 17th session of the Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The creation of my mandate by the General Assembly in 1996 was primarily a response to the appalling situation of conflict-affected children documented in Grassa Machel's report on the impact of armed conflict on children. In 1999, the Security Council also placed the issue of children and armed conflict on its agenda as an issue affecting international peace and security. The Council equipped the mandate with several tools for its implementation and identified 6 grave violations against children in armed conflict that it considered as particularly egregious: recruitment and use, killing and maiming, rape and other forms of sexual violence, abduction, attacks against schools and hospitals, and denial of humanitarian access to children. Last year, the United Nations verified nearly 33,000 of those grave violations committed against children. Each of these instances serves as a stark reminder that despite our collective efforts, there is a pressing need for further action. Dear colleagues, while UNICEF estimates that nearly 240 million children, or 1 in 10, have disabilities, with indications that a significantly higher number of children with disabilities live in conflict situations. I would, however, be unable to tell you how many of them count among the victims of these grave violations and how they were impacted by them. That is because the impact of armed conflict on children with disabilities has been vastly underreported and understudied, including within my office and my mandate. To fill this gap, my office published in December of last year a first study which investigates the unique repercussions of armed conflict on children with disabilities and formulates recommendations to promote a human rights-based approach to disability inclusion in the protection of children with disabilities in armed conflict. The first conclusion of our study has come as no surprise: the lack of data on children with disabilities in armed conflict, which undermines efforts to gain a comprehensive and accurate understanding of the impact of war on these children and contributes to perpetuating their invisibility in the development of prevention strategies, protection measures, and reintegration services. Despite this gap, the review of available literature and interviews conducted with relevant stakeholders demonstrate the disproportionate impact that armed conflict bears on children with disabilities. Children with disabilities are at a higher risk of being recruited and used by armed forces and armed groups, killed or maimed in hostilities, fall victim to sexual violence, and be abducted in armed conflict. Pre-existing barriers to their full participation in daily life, such as access to schools, health, and other services, are exacerbated with the destruction of infrastructure in conflict zones and the shrinking of safe spaces, which often correlate with an increased risk of grave violations. Children with disabilities may also experience difficulties fleeing attacks. The inadequacy of early warning systems and evacuation procedures often complicates their escape, as we've heard just now. They may be left behind by parents or caregivers, especially when routes are inaccessible or when they are institutionalized. In conflict-affected areas, children with disabilities may not have access to assistive devices, such as wheelchairs or hearing aids, or such devices might be inadequate for their age and size, thus exposing them to a higher risk of being recruited and used, killed and maimed, or abducted. Stigma, exclusion, a lack of protective social networks, a heightened risk of being unaccompanied, and sometimes reliance on others for support contribute to a higher vulnerability to sexual violence for children with disabilities. When it comes to reporting to authorities, children with disabilities and their families are also less likely to do so for fear of not being believed, owing to the wrongful perception that children with disabilities are desexualized and therefore not the target of sexual violence. While children with disabilities are not necessarily more at risk of experiencing attacks on schools and hospitals and denial of humanitarian access due to the collective nature of these two grave violations, their impact on them may, however, be more severe. Because they often require specific support and devices and services which are not readily available, children with disabilities are more likely to be left out of school, and when they do go to school, attacks may compel them to discontinue their education. Out-of-school children are at a higher risk of violence and exploitation. Attacks on hospitals have a particularly detrimental effect on children with disabilities, as they may require regular access to specific medical care, counseling, rehabilitation, or assistive technology. Reversibly, untreated injuries or illnesses may lead to long-term or secondary impairments. Likewise, the denial of humanitarian access prevents children with disabilities from accessing food, water, and sanitation, healthcare, assistive devices, mental health, and psychological support. This in turn may lead to the worsening of health conditions, which may lead to new or exacerbate existing long-term impairments. Dear colleagues, the dismal picture that I have just painted for you today is the daily reality of many conflict-affected children with disabilities every day, and it calls for urgent and resolute action. Our research points to several avenues to guide this action. First, the strengthening of data collection on children with disabilities, including in the framework of the Security Council mandated monitoring and reporting mechanism on children and armed conflict, would build an evidence base to inform programming and policy making. This includes the disaggregation of data by disability, in addition to other diversity factors such as gender and age. We do not possess this today. Second, consultations with persons with disabilities, including children, and the organizations that represent them at all levels, would support the mainstreaming of disability inclusion into child protection policies and ensure that the views of children with disabilities are reflected in processes that concern them, including in mediation efforts and peace-building efforts. They are indeed best placed to express their own requirements and experiences, which are necessary for the development of legislation, policy, and programs adequate to protect their rights and their well-being. Finally, awareness-raising initiatives and the provision of training and other capacity-building efforts on disability inclusion, including, but not limited to, military personnel, humanitarian actors, and child protection staff, would really contribute to enhance the protection of children with disabilities in armed conflict. Dear colleagues, to conclude, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Convention on the Rights of the Child echo each other in calling for bridges to be built and strengthened between disability inclusion and child protection. I stand before you today with that objective in mind and the hope that the dialogue we have established will continue beyond the end of this roundtable. Our task is clear. We must ensure that all persons with disabilities, including children, receive the adequate protection they deserve so that no one is left behind. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gamba, for your insight. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite our next panelist to take the floor. Mr. Waqar Puri of Transforming Communities for Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities Global, based in Pakistan. Mr. Puri is a person with a psychosocial disability and is currently working with the Transforming Communities for Inclusion as a senior program officer. Based in Pakistan, he is a youth representative and he has been actively contributing to the national, regional, and global advocacy initiatives. He is a certified consultant of International Association of Accessibility Professional. He is also the part of the technical working group for Elhorn Humanitarian Innovative Fund and GMC member of the Disability Rights Fund for making the grants and project inclusive of persons with diverse disabilities. Mr. Puri is a BRIZ alumni for the BRIZ CRPD SDG training initiatives. I kindly invite Mr. Puri to deliver his presentation. Mr. Puri, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vakar Puri and I belong to Pakistan, and I'm working with Transforming Communities for Inclusion. TCI is an independent and global organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities with its presence in more than 50 countries. I want to thank the host, co-host, and all organizers for providing me with this opportunity to speak today at the second roundtable on persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies during this very important 17th session of the Conference of the State Parties. I would like to start by expressing my deepest gratitude to all of us sitting in this room for promoting and contributing towards the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in our countries and working for the advancement of the rights of persons, approximately 1.3 billion people with disabilities at national, regional, and global levels. On behalf of the movement today, I want to emphasize that we are still far behind in providing legal identities, fundamental human rights, and community supports to persons with disabilities to live equally and independently in the community, and specifically to persons with disabilities from underrepresented groups and who belong to Global South countries. Persons with disabilities, particularly persons with psychosocial disabilities, are highly discriminated in the mainstream societies. We are excluded from the different walks of life as we are tagged with the labels of being a mad person, being a mentally ill, or an unsound mind person, to name a few. We are deprived of our legal capacity under the legal incapacity laws, such as mental health laws, and a wide variety of discriminatory civil laws. In many TCI member countries, and especially in Pakistan, we are still fighting for our identity. We are not even recognized as persons with disabilities, and therefore, whenever we talk about mental health, inclusion, or DRR, we are seen from the medical lens of having an illness and full discourse on providing good care institutions, treatments, hospitalization, having more and more psychiatrists in the country, and availability of more rehabilitation services. This kind of discussions just start to take place. As persons with psychosocial disabilities, we are continued to be admitted in a variety of public and private institutions in the name of treatment and care, and are sent to those institutions against our own will. There are several instances of accidents and deaths in such places during the humanitarian emergencies reported by various TCI members. In situations of emergencies, families and communities seek safer ground while those who are institutionalized perish inside custody. Even if such custodial places were not already prevalent before disasters, a variety of institutions are aggregated living institutions and aggregated living arrangements are built post-disaster as a way of building back better. Instead of transforming communities and providing community support systems and services to people with disabilities, persons, especially children with intellectual disabilities, autistic persons, women, girls, and elderly persons with psychosocial disabilities are often found lumped together in such custodial places abandoned by families. Governments and development agencies continue to make investments in either building new institutions or renovating the existing ones. In my country, Pakistan, there are a variety of new institutions mushrooming in numbers since the last decade in the name of care and independent living centers, which are mostly run by doctors and rehabilitation professionals. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I got a chance to visit a private institution in Pakistan, and upon talking to a young person with a psychosocial disability, he said, "I was left in this institution by my family members, and they have not visited me since last 2 years." And when I asked him about COVID-19 pandemic, he shared, "Yes, I have heard from the staff that there is a COVID spread outside. And since that time, we are not having access to good food, good services, and also enough food. And when we have been chained inside, I am tired of this place as nobody comes to even ask if we need anything. I want to go back home and live back a life with my family, how I used to live few years ago. I want to meet my friends and family members and be part of the community once again, and also participate in my cultural events." During pandemic, several custodial institutions shut their doors completely to the outside world, and there is no data on how many survived the pandemic, there is no evidence of what supports were made available for people living inside institutions. People with disabilities staying in camps and evacuation centers are left to their own devices and resources, rather than seen as needing specific disability assistance or general services. During drought and famine situations, persons with psychosocial disabilities also die due to starvation, because they are the last ones to get food and water in camps and are often left behind during evacuation plans. Women with psychosocial disabilities are exploited during rescue operations as mulls to carry food, medicines, supplies between disaster zone camps and households. Practices of violence, abuse, and sexual exploitation of women and girls with psychosocial disabilities occur very commonly in evacuation centers and camps, as we are continued to be seen as non-persons and have no recourse to justice. During preparedness, there are a number of activities carried out by states and humanitarian agencies, but unfortunately, we are left out as we are seen as mental patients who may need only psychiatric assistance during the emergency situations. The capacity building programs focus on mental health rather than disability inclusion, which restricts the humanitarian programming to stay medical model and coercive. On behalf of the movement today, we emphasize that all stakeholders and communities must be transformed from medical model to more inclusive and human rights model, from institutionalization to right to live in communities, from rehabilitation to inclusion, and from treatment to community support systems. The entry point for disaster preparedness must be wider, having the framing of inclusion for all persons with disabilities within the community. We urge that communities must be supported by state parties to be inclusive during regular times and also during the situations of emergencies and disasters. A culture of community inclusion must prevail in society by providing CRPD-compliant community support services and community support services, along with comprehensive awareness programs on disability inclusion and disaster preparedness. States must ensure that the right to live independently in the communities is not suspended during the situations of humanitarian emergencies and disaster situations. States must ensure that the process of deinstitutionalization of persons with disabilities starts immediately and in the light of the deinstitutionalization guidelines adopted by the CRPD committee in 2022, which has given a visibility to the situation of underrepresented groups, especially during the situations of humanitarian emergencies and disasters. The guidelines must be used by the humanitarian agencies as a reference document during the humanitarian programming. The deinstitutionalization process must figure in the national disaster management protocols, and OPDs must be involved at every step of planning, implementation, and monitoring. States must ensure that all legal incapacity laws are dismantled and persons with psychosocial disabilities are recognized as persons with disabilities to exercise legal capacity and be included in all disability inclusive development programs at the national level. States must ensure that people with disabilities are included in disability disaggregated data collection for inclusive budgeting. States must ensure that budgets utilized for mental health services are utilized and transformed for providing social support systems and CRPD compliant services to have access to mainstream services during the humanitarian emergencies. Investments must be made for settlement packages to live in communities and providing social protection and universal health coverage for people with disabilities. States must also ensure that there is no gender-based violence, gender and disability-related discrimination during preparedness, response, and recovery processes. All forms of violences against women and girls with psychosocial disabilities and persons from neurodiverse identities must end immediately. I will stop here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Puri, for your excellent presentation. Dear delegates, civil society friends, I once again would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience with us today. I will now hand over the co-chairmanship back to Mr. Tatulasi, Vice President of the conference, who will continue to moderate our meeting today. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Gurung, and thank you to our panelists. Distinguished delegates, let's now move to the second phase of this roundtable, that is interactive discussion between panelists, delegates, and participants. As announced at the outset of this meeting, in the following segment of approximately 1 hour, there will be opportunity for delegations and other observers to request the floor, to either pose specific questions to panelists or to make a brief comment relevant to the discussion. For this purpose, delegates and other participants may press the button at their desk to request the floor. All interested delegations and accredited observers from UN entities and national human rights institutions are also able to inscribe. In a moment, on a first-come, first-served basis, we will call and give the floor to the first 5 inscribed government delegations, whose microphones shall be unmuted when they are given the floor. In order to ensure the discussion is inclusive and following the decision of the Bureau, after every 5 states parties, we will invite 1 non-governmental organization, 1 UN entity, and 1 national human rights institution to take the floor. When you are given the floor, please first identify yourself and the title of the delegation or organization you are representing. Please either pose specific question to the panel or share your brief comments relevant to the discussion. Please refrain from reading prepared statements. All interventions must be no longer than 2 minutes with no exception. I will count on everybody for your cooperation to adhere to the time limit. The floor is now open for inscriptions. Okay, I will start with and now I recognize the first speaker on the list, the delegation from Georgia. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor. My name is Alexander Darakholidze. I am a Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of Georgia. I would like to use this opportunity to share our experience concerning protecting the rights of persons with disability during emergency situations. We have studied international standards to ensure the successful development of measures focused on the needs of persons with disabilities during expected emergency situations. Our emergency situation management service consults and implements emergency plans for organizations and schools, including those for children with special needs. We train authorized representatives on these plans, considering measures focused on the needs of persons with disabilities, and ensure fast responders are always prepared. Additionally, we conduct regular trainings in schools for children with special needs and have developed electronic guidelines and informative brochures tailored for these children to ensure they have access to the same information as everyone else. I would appreciate any advice on additional measures to protect better and promote the rights of persons with disabilities during emergencies. I thank you.
Thank you. And the next delegation on our list is delegation of Finland. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Veera Florika-Rajala, and I'm representing the Finnish delegation. I'm also the chair of the Finnish Disability Forum. We have, the last couple of years, worked quite intensely with different kind of crisis questions. We have the climate crisis, we have the war in Ukraine, which also partially affects us, and we have different kind of situation which occurs because of this kind of And this means that we have tried to get more knowledge about how people with disability themselves see their situation. And we did the survey last year, which shows two specific things. One, that we have to, in our planning, when we do legislation, planning concerning evacuation, or any other measures in concerning crisis, to have persons with disability included in the working groups in order to actually, in the procedure, to know what things to have in mind when we make our plans. The second important thing is that persons with disability have the interest themselves to actually get knowledge how to themselves efficiently handle different kinds of crisis situations. Resilience is one really key thing in order to actually, when a crisis situation comes, COVID or whatever comes here next, to actually have possibilities to know how to handle the situation. And I would be really interested to know how the panelists thinks about the fact we haven't in this discussion mentioned anything about nothing without us, a phrase, which is in a sense.
Thank you. And now I recognize Ukraine as the next delegation to speak. The floor is yours, please.
Greetings, dear participants. I'm from Ukrainian delegation. Unfortunately, Ukraine today has to report on the implementation of the UN CRPD primarily through the prism of Article 11 of this convention. For more than 10 years, the number of people affected by the war in Ukraine has been growing every day due to the aggressive action of the Russian Federation. Returning these people to normal life and integration them into society is one of the Ukrainian strategic objectives for the coming years. It would be fair to say that authorities tried to respond promptly in new challenges during martial law, as evidenced by numerous changes and improvement to legislation. The unprecedented aggression of Russian Federation has a significant impact on the right of children in Ukraine. Children have been victims of indiscriminate attacks by the Russian Federation of civilian and civilian objects. They have been injured, resulting in disabilities. As on June 2024, 1,960 children were affected by the war, 550 of whom were died, unfortunately. Mind blindness and gunshot complicated injury were situated by 1,366 children who need to pass further different and difficult rehabilitation. One of the barriers for the person with disability in the context of hostilities is accessibility, information, architectural, and transportation. There are difficulties with the evacuation of 20 hours residential facilities for response with disabilities located in the areas of hostilities. The evacuation was complicated by context shelling and the lack of specially adapted vehicles. As a result, 24 residential institutions from 5 regions of Ukraine with about 3,500 residents could not be evacuated to the government-controlled territory of Ukraine. The situation is with ensuring the right of persons with
Thank you. The next delegation to speak is from Guyana. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Persons with disabilities around the world continue to face heightened vulnerabilities in the wake of natural disasters, conflicts, and other crises. Developing countries like Guyana are also becoming increasingly vulnerable to devastating impacts of natural and man-made hazards, which disproportionately impact people with disabilities. Therefore, it is crucial, Chair, that persons with disabilities be prioritized in disaster risk management activities. And I'm pleased to share with you the story of Guyana. Guyana's National Commission on Disability holds a permanent seat on the National Disaster Risk Management Platform. This mechanism ensures that persons with disabilities are among the first to receive humanitarian aid and psychosocial support in times of disasters and emergencies. The government of Guyana recognizes that reliable data is essential for effective planning and response to humanitarian emergencies, and is currently conducting a situation analysis of persons with disabilities to inform and respond to their needs, particularly those in situations of risk. Comprehensive disaster risk management legislation is also currently being drafted and will guarantee the inclusion of persons with disabilities in planning and prioritize their needs in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Chair, The growing prevalence of acquired disability as a result of conflict, such as the war in Gaza, is a stark reminder of the need for more to be done to protect our people. Guyana remains committed to ensuring that the protection and safety of persons with disabilities are adequately and systematically addressed through policy, legislation, and humanitarian action. Thank you.
Thank you. The next delegate to speak is from Lao PDR. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Lao Delegation, I would like to thanks for informative presentation from the panelists. To implement laws on persons with disabilities and laws on disaster risk management, the National Committee for Disaster Management at all levels provided information on disaster risk and allowed persons with disabilities to participate training session. In addition, UXO team conducted survey and clearance at the location where persons with disabilities building houses and agriculture activities. During the disaster happened, rescue team has special attention to assist persons with disabilities. Apart from that, National Social Protection for also integrated persons with disabilities. The humanitarian emergencies, the assistance provided provided the temporary camps, food, clothes, and sanitation. So the strengthening coordination need to be continued with disaster management committee at all levels to fully integrate the work for persons with disabilities, such as early warning, response, and recovery, including the national regulatory authorities. I thank you.
Thank you. As agreed, after every 5 states, it's NGO representative who is going to speak, and this time is non-governmental organization, L'Arche International. Please, the floor is yours.
My name is May Banting from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. I believe in myself. I believe I am strong. And I believe that me and my friends around the world need to be listened to, valued and belong. I am here representing L'Arche International. L'Arche is a federation of more than 160 communities in 37 countries. L'Arche International is committed to contributing to a world centered on dignity, rights, opportunities, and community. There are large communities in Ukraine, Haiti, Palestine, and Syria where humanitarian crises are happening right now. I am here at the UN today. My friends from those countries are not. L'Arche International submits this statement under subtheme 2, Persons with Disabilities in Situations of Risk and Humanitarian Emergencies. We call for the leadership of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at all stages of humanitarian work. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities must be included when identifying risks and making decisions about resources and programs in all humanitarian work. The full participation and leadership of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities will make humanitarian actions more inclusive, accessible, and effective for everyone.
Now I hand over to the National Human Rights Institution, Office of the Public Defender of Georgia. Ms. Irina Chikladze, the floor is yours, please.
Hello, thank you everybody, and I want to have short comment on today's discussion. In times of emergency, such as natural disasters or public health crisis, the state ability to respond effectively and inclusively is critical. Ensuring that all citizens, particularly vulnerable groups like persons with disabilities, receive adequate support is not only a matter of equality, but also a measure of a society overall resilience. When the state responds to emergency situation and provides support for persons with disabilities, it is crucial to ensure that support is provided equally to all those in need, leaving no group behind. For example, the government's anti-crisis economic plan devised in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in Georgia did not sufficiently consider the need of all persons with disabilities. Only individuals with profound disabilities and children with disabilities were eligible for social benefits. As a result, individuals with significant and moderate disabilities were left without necessary assistance. When the evaluating model of disability is flaunted in a country, the government should more carefully study the individual needs of persons with disabilities and make decisions accordingly. Bearing in mind this negative experience, the state must take the necessary steps to better include persons with disabilities in measures taken before, during, and after emergency situations to prevent inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you. We continue with the representatives of the government. The next delegation to speak is from Kenya. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. The government of Kenya is implementing the financing local-related climate action program that seeks to strengthen local resilience to the impact of climate change by building local capacity for planning, budgeting, implementation, and monitoring resilience investments in a way that promotes collaborative partnerships. In partnership with UNICEF, we have developed a humanitarian innovation program that seeks to address gaps in data and systems that hinder the inclusion of children with disabilities and their families in humanitarian crises and emergencies. Kenya experienced 5 consecutive failed rain seasons that triggered the government of Kenya to roll out a range of drought mitigation and response actions due to rising number of food insecure populations steadily. USAID and CEDA provided support to affected populations through WFP. Today, we seek to foster multi-sectoral coordination, collaboration, and ask for panelists to guide further on how best we can ensure policies, programs, and interventions prioritize the needs and rights of persons with disability in disaster risk reduction and management efforts, and what structures have worked in low and middle income countries. Thank you, Chair.
I hand over to the distinguished delegate from South Africa. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa is committed to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, especially Article 11. Our approach is aligned with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which stresses the importance of disability-inclusive disaster risk management. Our national policies are crafted with acute awareness of the heightened vulnerability faced by persons with disabilities during emergencies. The evidence is clear. Persons with disabilities are disproportionately affected by disaster events, a situation that is exacerbated by existing socioeconomic disparities and barriers to accessing information, communication, and emergency support. South Africa has undertaken a desktop research on the impact of climate change on persons with disabilities and the inclusion in climate action, mitigation, and adaptation strategies. This initial report will necessitate well-funded and more fully fledged research, which will be commissioned next year to ensure South Africa appropriately responds to disasters caused by climate change that impact negatively on persons with disabilities. While it remains true that we have made significant strides, challenges still remain. Accessibility, communication barriers, and socioeconomic inequalities continue to impede full and effective participation of persons with disabilities in emergency preparedness, response, and recovery phases. Addressing these requires continuous effort, resources, and a commitment at all levels of society. Mr. Chair, we cannot engage on this important topic and not reflect on the situation that has been unfolding in Gaza since October last year. The continued war by the occupying state against the Palestinian people has created a humanitarian crisis that has severely affected persons with disabilities and created another layer of systemic discrimination. There have been numerous examples of Israel's deliberate disregard for its obligations under international humanitarian law, and this also extends to its obligations under the CRPD. The solution to resolve the humanitarian crisis is to stop the war through a sustained humanitarian ceasefire. I thank you.
Thank you. The next delegation to speak is from Ecuador, please.
Muy buenas tardes, Edison Martínez, secretario técnico del Consejo Nacional para la Igualdad de Discapacidades. El Ecuador ha tomado como bandera de Estado impulsar la prevención, incluso priorización de atención de las personas con discapacidad y personas de movilidad reducida ante eventos de riesgos y situaciones de emergencia. Es por ello que se ha construido la Guía de Gestión Inclusiva del Riesgo con enfoque en personas con discapacidad, contando la valiosa aportes de sociedad civil. También esta fue publicada en formatos accesibles. También tenemos el protocolo interinstitucional para atención de alertas de emergencia relacionadas a personas con discapacidad para orientar a operadores de asistencias en emergencias. En el proyecto de implementación de la atención inclusiva de gestión de riesgos para personas con discapacidad se ha considerado imprescindible la ejecución de la georreferenciación de personas con discapacidad que habitan en zonas de riesgo. Es así que la pregunta es, ¿cómo se puede fortalecer a través de nuevas tecnologías, nuevos espacios o nuevas estrategias el proceso de apoyo y cooperación entre las federaciones o asociaciones de personas con discapacidad y los entes gubernamentales para entablar alianzas estratégicas y también con los respaldos de cooperación internacional? Gracias.
Thank you, and now I want to invite the delegation of the European Union to take the floor, please.
Thank you, dear President. The fact that persons with disabilities are disproportionately affected in a situation of risk and humanitarian emergency has become all too clear in the crisis we have experienced in recent years. We have seen repeated examples of how emergency plans have an insufficient disability perspective, which not least affect those living in institutions. Moreover, the COVID-19 crisis reveals severe weak spots in our health system. It is imperative that we work to remedy these flaws. Strengthening the participation of persons with disabilities in the planning and decision-making process is key. European Union partners in humanitarian aid operations are encouraged to pursue dialogue with local organizations of persons with disabilities. Furthermore, the European Union requires all partners to mainstream the needs of persons with disabilities in their actions, including by using European funds for awareness, finance, training programs, for disaster situations, including preparedness projects and exercise, and setting disability inclusive requirements. Ensuring the right to an autonomous and independent life is also key in situations of crisis. Mr. President, what is the panel's views on how to ensure disability inclusive and accessible emergency response while respecting independent and autonomous living? Thank you.
Thank you. Next delegation in our list to speak is Dominican Republic, please.
Muchas gracias, Presidente. Me gustaría comentar en ese sentido que todo lo que se ha expuesto en este panel relacionado con la gestión de riesgos y situaciones de emergencia guarda muchísima relación con lo establecido en el artículo 8 de la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad acerca de la toma de conciencia, la importancia de que en todo tiempo nosotros podamos dar a conocer el reconocimiento de los derechos de las personas con discapacidad en todos los aspectos y en ese sentido poder eliminar esas diferentes barreras que limitan esa participación de las personas con discapacidad, que la principal barrera en este sentido es la de actitud, provocando así barrera de estructura y de comunicación. Y en este sentido, pues, concientizar al personal, no solo al personal que ofrece respuesta directa en el momento de la emergencia, sino a las autoridades, a los tomadores de decisiones, de manera que se pueda transversalizar el enfoque de discapacidad ante las respuestas de emergencia. Muchas veces estos centros de refugio no cuentan con un intérprete de lengua de señas o no existe la accesibilidad a nivel de estructura y todo esto se debe a un desconocimiento. No se conoce la importancia que tiene esto para que la vida de la persona con discapacidad pues se pueda preservar. Desde la República Dominicana Dominicana implementamos un programa de concientización con miras a orientar a los participantes acerca del trato digno a personas con discapacidad desde un enfoque de derechos, lo que va a permitir una efectiva interacción con estas personas y que se les pueda tratar como personas, no exactamente mirando su discapacidad, sino reconociendo que ante todo primero somos personas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. We go back to the representative of non-governmental organization, and the organization to speak is People with Disability Australia. Please, the floor is yours.
My name is Lisa Ira, and I'm representing People with Disability Australia. Today I want to address the issue of safeguarding people with disability in group homes during a pandemic. Australia's recent Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability heard evidence of the high prevalence of violence and abuse that occurs in disability group homes, which we can only assume continued during the pandemic. Pandemics present a unique dilemma for upholding our rights in group homes. On the one hand, to uphold our Article 25 right to health, we must minimise exposure to the virus. On the other hand, we need safeguarding in group homes to uphold our Article 16 right to freedom from exploitation, violence and abuse. In Australia, official community visitor schemes provide safeguarding for people with disability in group homes by conducting unannounced visits. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some group homes went into extensive lockdowns and were closed to outside visitors and service providers. Indeed, Melbourne in Australia experienced the longest lockdown in the world. Although community visitors could speak to people with disability over video or phone call, often this was in the presence of a support worker, which is clearly not effective if the abuse is perpetrated by the support worker. What then would effective safeguarding look like in the event of a future pandemic? This is a complex question. Usually when a complex question arises, we ask the experts. In this case, the experts are people with disability, particularly those living in group homes. We call on states parties to co-design a strategy for safeguarding people with disability in group homes for the next pandemic as a matter of urgency. We also want to use this opportunity to implore states parties to the optional protocol.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I hand over to the delegation of Sweden. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Marina Karlsson and I represent the Swedish delegation. Today we would like to address a pressing issue that has far-reaching consequences for groups at risk around the world. Due to the lack of active involvement of civil society in crisis preparedness, particularly concerning persons with disabilities, the UNCRPD mandates that states take all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of people with disabilities in risk situations. In many states, a staggering majority of local areas lack comprehensive plans to provide services and facilities for persons with disabilities during crisis. This situation not only violates international obligations, but also endangers lives. Furthermore, many persons with disabilities remain uninformed about how to prepare for crisis and war, leaving them disproportionately at risk when disaster strikes. Civil society organizations in Sweden have erased that lessons were not learned from the pandemic or when we had experienced floods. The need to go from ad hoc measures to systematic work and accountability for disability-inclusive disaster risk reduction, climate action, and health preparedness is still ahead of us. We welcome the recent recommendations from the UNCRPD Committee in April this year for human rights-based inclusive strategies and action plans, including persons with disabilities on all levels. At the end of the day, it is a matter of life and death. Our crisis preparedness plans must be inclusive, comprehensive, and reflective of the diverse needs of our entire population. We must ensure that the voices of persons with disabilities and our representative organizations are involved in the planning process. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegation of Malta is next in our speakers list. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm George Borch, representing CRPD Malta. Malta's 2021-2030 National Disability Strategy actions are not only linked to the CRPD, but also specified on the Sendai framework. The strategy specifies that the COVID-19 Disability Task Force, comprising several stakeholders from disability and related sectors, such as the health sector, be made on standby committee by Malta's UNCRPD National Coordination Mechanism. It is to meet at least once a year and ensure proper stakeholders coordination in line with the Disability Sensitive and Disability Inclusive General Emergency Plan to finalize Malta Civil Protection Department. While it is important to react, we want to reach a point at which we are proactive rather than reactive. We want to learn, in particular, from the lessons of the pandemic, when authorities such as the health, education, and security sectors switched to emergency mode, while demonstrated a complete disregard to issues such as reasonable accommodation, until the Commission intervened following complaints received. Finally, as a member of the international community, Malta insists and continues to support efforts such as those undertaken by the Office of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disability to make sure that the humanitarian emergencies resulting due to situations of armed conflicts are also addressed in a disability-sensitive and disability-inclusive manner. We would like also to recall Malta's particular support for the situation of the children in the armed conflict, exemplified through which it is being placed high on the agenda of the Security Council, during which Malta served on the body over the past years. It unfortunately transpires time and time again that persons with disability are some of the individuals to be affected first and affected the most by armed conflict, and without appropriate regional and international responses, and such as they will continue to be among the ones to be most affected left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. This next delegation in the list is from Romania. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. As a coordinating national institution for the implementation of the CRPD, the National Authority for the Protection of Persons with Disability concluded a collaboration protocol with the Ministry of Internal Affairs last year. The purpose of the protocol was to establish the conditions and the general framework for collaboration between the parties in the field of emergency preparedness for major emergency or disaster according to the needs of persons with disability. Inter alia, the national authority cooperates with the Department for Emergency Situation for adapting the evacuation procedures to the needs of persons with disabilities. Also, we have developed the guidelines on how can you survive an earthquake and printed the booklet in Braille language. In addition, the collaboration protocol aims to provide a training course for firefighters on the topic of disability in disaster situation in 10 pilot counties in Romania. In this project, we partnered with civil society such as Romanian Blind Association and the representatives of the deaf. The training took place in the first semester of this year and ensured access of persons with disability to special intervention resources adapted to their specific vulnerabilities and needs. For the emergency personnel involved in the training, they became more aware of the particularities of disabilities, including the limited access to the physical environment, information, and means of communication. Chair, the universe of rights and challenges for persons with disabilities goes beyond national framework. This being said, the Ukrainian refugees with disabilities that sought shelter in Romania after the war broke benefited from the special.
Thank you. I invite the delegation of Singapore to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair and panelists, for your rich sharing. I'm Stephanie from the Singapore Ministry of Social and Family Development. The protection and safety of persons with disabilities is an essential part of Singapore's emergency management framework. We strive to ensure that emergency warnings and services are accessible to all. The COVID-19 pandemic also taught us the importance of partnering persons with disabilities to create more inclusive emergency responses, such as sign language interpretation and using visual storyboards to better convey testing procedures. For a low-lying island state like Singapore, climate-induced disasters such as floods and extreme weather present a growing and pressing challenge that requires multifaceted solutions, spanning across digital, economic, infrastructure, and social sectors. As we develop comprehensive mitigation and adaptation plans, we should continue to pay attention to the needs of persons with disabilities and improve cross-sectoral efforts to develop disability-inclusive responses to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite delegation of Spain to speak. Please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Soy Verónica Balmaseda, de la Dirección General de Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad en el Ministerio de Derechos Sociales, Consumo y Agenda 2030. España es un país altamente comprometido con las situaciones de riesgo y emergencias humanitarias. Y en esta cumbre proponemos extender este compromiso a la discapacidad, revisando las políticas sanitarias nacionales de emergencia y garantizando que se asignen fondos para satisfacer las necesidades de las personas con discapacidad, supervisando la accesibilidad de los lugares y servicios destinados a situaciones de emergencia, así como los riesgos de protección, incluida la violencia de género, que pueden afectar a las personas con discapacidad, asegurando la accesibilidad en los protocolos y dispositivos de emergencias, así como los servicios de emergencias telemáticos y telefónicos sean accesibles a las personas con discapacidad sensorial y cognitiva, tales como el 112 en Europa, fomentando la educación para que las personas con discapacidad aprendan habilidades de supervivencia y estrategias de reducción de riesgos, incluido cómo protegerse de las infecciones y artefactos explosivos. Por último, y para terminar, desde España, siendo conscientes de que en las situaciones de guerras las personas con discapacidad son las que corren más riesgos de quedarse atrás, invitamos a la Convención de los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad y a todos los Estados miembros a ser impulsores de los procesos de paz, no solo por el número de muertes de personas con discapacidad que se producen durante las guerras, sino por las discapacidades que las propias guerras generan. La paz tiene que ser nuestra prioridad en la defensa de los derechos de las personas con discapacidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. We continue with the representative of non-governmental organization, and the organization to speak is Pacific Disability Forum. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, exclusion is costly, and inclusion is the only way for resilient humanitarian action. Humanitarian actors cannot afford to leave anyone behind, particularly persons with disabilities who represent 60% of the global population, yet more often than not, we are grouped into the vulnerable group, yet very much capable of contributing to society and development. If we want our humanitarian actions to be inclusive, truly inclusive, then we cannot afford to leave persons with disabilities out and remain excluded. We will need to be included, organizations, persons with disabilities, and their representatives to be able to participate fully in humanitarian action if you are to right the wrong and truly make our humanitarian action inclusive and equitable. I thank you.
Thank you. The next delegation to speak is Egypt. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you, the panelists, for their input. Nationally, Egypt has already established National Committee for Crisis and Management and Risk Reduction, in which the National Council for Persons with Disabilities is a board member. As president of the National Council, I cannot be oblivious to the impact of the geopolitical context and situations of armed conflict, putting persons with disabilities at high risk. In the connection, upholding the legal provisions of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, specifically Article 11, is a must. In addition, the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, as well as UN Security Council resolutions, emphasize the need for protection and care for vulnerable groups in conflict situations while ensuring the safety, medical care, and inclusion of persons with disabilities. Images of civilian victims of atrocities and bombardments in Gaza are evident examples. In situations of conflicts, when humanitarian aid is being denied or being insufficient, when accessibility is in question and the security of humanitarian actors is at risk, How can we ensure the protection of persons with disabilities, let alone take their need into consideration while designing and implementing humanitarian interventions? In Gaza, Palestinian civilians have been under persistent Israeli bombardments since October 2023. Explosions, shellings, and other forms.
Thank you. Thank you. Last but not least, delegation to speak is from Poland. Please, the floor is yours.
I am Łukasz Kraso, Minister for Disabilities from Poland. I want to focus on the Security Council resolution on the protection of persons with disabilities in armed conflicts and humanitarian emergencies. It was the first time that the Council focused on the situation of persons with disabilities in conflicts and emergencies. Back then, we hoped that better times for persons with disabilities would come and that we didn't have to revisit the text on so many occasions. After Russia's bandit attack, millions of people fled Ukraine. Many of them came and stayed in Poland. Among them, there are also persons with disabilities. Poland showed that solidarity and provided them with support and assistance key they required. We have allocated over $50 million US for this purpose. Today, in troublous times, we need international solidarity even more. Despite the fact that also the aggressor states must respect international humanitarian law and many are signatories to the CRPD. Bullets and bombs do not select only healthy and strong people. In fact, they target persons with disabilities equally. As we approach the 5th anniversary of this resolution, I would like to ask the panel that the concrete steps, in their view, can the international community take to ensure the protection and agency of persons with disabilities in ongoing and future conflicts? Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for your interesting comments and questions posed to the panel. I will now turn to our distinguished panelists to provide their responses and share their thoughts on the questions raised and comments made. We would kindly ask each panelist to limit their response to approximately 3 minutes. Let's begin with Ms. Gunta Anka. Ms. Anka, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for so many interesting comments and so many questions. And of course, 3 minutes is going to be not enough for me to answer to your comments and questions. I'd just like to say that I was really happy to hear about so many positive examples. You talk from different countries, and I'm sure that it makes life of people with disabilities much better in a situation of crisis and humanitarian problems. But still, I would like to stress that we have many, many challenges. And there are some of those points I would like to make your attention. We shouldn't forget about marginalized groups. We shouldn't forget about people with disabilities, but especially about women with disabilities, about children and elderly people. They are in even worse position than everybody else. They are not able to take care of themselves, and there are those who very often should leave their country, and they should stay somewhere in other countries without support they really need. I would like also to stress on a meaningful involvement of organizations of people with disabilities. And meaningful, I mean that they really are not just participate in the working groups, in the discussions, but also solutions made by those organizations has been taken in account. And involvement of organizations should be on a very different levels. It should be on regional level, state level, and which is also very important on community level, because community is exactly the place which could make people feel more involved and more taken into account. And the last sentence I would like to say is that work causes more disabilities like it was before. And so it means we have more and more people with disabilities, but we could hope that work should become even more accessible and more inclusive to everyone. Because otherwise, we can't live in a nice and open society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Sanka. I now invite Mr. Anderson Henao Oroso to share his response, please.
Gracias. Yo sé que son muchos los comentarios y en los cuales coincidimos todos y todas, pero yo quisiera aprovechar este escenario también para manifestar la solidaridad con las personas con discapacidad que en este momento se encuentran en medio de la guerra, que se encuentran en medio de esas crisis humanitarias. Desde el gobierno colombiano les saludamos. Lo que hemos visto es que además del riesgo que enfrenta la vida en las emergencias humanitarias, también la moral y la ética corren el riesgo de ser suspendidas. No podemos permitir que esto suceda. No podemos permitir que se privilegien unas vidas sobre otras. No podemos permitir las asimetrías morales a partir de las diversidades humanas. Esto requiere la presencia de activistas, profesionales, la academia, funcionarios, servidores públicos y gobernantes que movilicen creativamente las instituciones responsables de mitigar el sufrimiento humano. La mayoría de las veces no se requiere de profundos análisis para comprender cómo el sufrimiento humano puede ser reducido. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Oroso. Now I invite Ms. Virginia Gamba to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A very fruitful discussion. I would like to commence just responding to the Security Council resolution mentions made by Poland. I think we have 4 Security Council resolutions that mention children with disability and persons with disability, including children. Those would be 2225 of 2015 and 2427 of 2018. And these ones really ask for specific requirements of children with disabilities should be addressed in situations of armed conflict, including access to healthcare, psychosocial support, and education. Then comes the only one with 1 operative paragraph. None of the other ones have got an operative paragraph. That would be Resolution 2601 of 2021. And that one, with its only operative paragraph, says, urging member states to provide sustainable, timely, appropriate, inclusive, and accessible assistance to children with disabilities who are affected by armed conflict, including reintegration, rehabilitation, and psychosocial support, and to ensure access to education on an equal basis provided in the context of armed conflict. And finally, the most far-reaching of all the Security Council resolutions, although not so much operative, is 2475 of 2019. And there's 4 full paragraphs on this. It talks mostly about disability inclusive assistance. It talks about enabling meaningful participation and representation. It talks about steps to eliminate discrimination and marginalization, and it talks about information and recommendations concerning people in reports, ordering people to actually put that data in. All of this now just needs to be implemented. We really should implement these resolutions with speed, which we are not doing. And we are forgetting that there are some regional instruments that are far more reaching than Security Council resolutions. And these two instruments that are very strong are the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child and the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Africa, also called the African Disability Protocol, that has a lot to teach us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gamba. I now invite Mr. Wakar Puri to speak, please.
Thank you so much. So I would quickly respond to some of the questions and comments, specifically on participation, grassroots engagement, group homes, institutionalization. So to respond to some of those, I would say that, yes, we must ensure that persons with diverse disabilities including underrepresented groups and their organizations are involved and consulted, keeping an intersectional approach for making all essential and required services available. This must include and is not limited to prioritize access to disability inclusive relief programs, health services, sexual and reproductive health services, habilitation and rehabilitation, personal assistance, housing, social security, skill development, employment, and CRPD compliant community-based support systems and services. I think we must really ensure that and we must work on a wide range of awareness and sensitization activities for stakeholders on human rights of persons with disabilities for all authorities, responders, and actors at all levels of disaster response, preparedness, recovery, and building. Community members specifically will always be the first one to respond. Therefore, they should be given capacity building on disability inclusion and they should be made part of disability drills and preparedness activities. There must be measures to ensure that the protection and ensure the safety and protection of persons with disabilities shall not mean creating segregated housing, shelter, institutions, group home, etc. As guided by the UN guidelines on deinstitutionalization, institutions will definitely or any segregated living arrangement will increase the risk of life and liberty of persons with disabilities. Persons with psychosocial disabilities are confined to such spaces and must be evacuated, and opportunities provided for resettlement in communities should be provided on an equal basis to others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puri, for your response. I'll now invite Ms. Gurung to deliver her final remarks. Ms. Gurung, the floor is yours.
Thank you to all the distinguished speakers and interventions. We have heard this afternoon from all the speakers that the situation of risks and humanitarian emergencies is not only related to armed conflict, natural and climate-driven disasters and health emergencies, but beyond that. So it has been a wide range of different contexts of emergencies that has made people's lives, including persons with disabilities, in a very critical condition. So the discussion today we are having should shape in that manner, in a wider and comprehensive manner. The upcoming general comment number 9 of the CRPD should include all the situation and context. We have realized the persisting structural, systemic, and systematic historical, social, environmental barriers, as well as the stigmatization and the marginalizations and the needs and perspectives and the human rights of people with disabilities, especially underrepresented people with disabilities, primarily focusing on women and girls with disabilities, children with disabilities, people with psychosocial, deaf, blind, intellectual, profound, and severe disability, including indigenous people and minority people with disabilities, are frequently neglected, excluded, and their needs are unmet during the aftermath of the situation of risks and humanitarian emergencies. Our lived experience from Asia and across the globe highlights that too often the humanitarian crisis addresses one marginalized sections or a single linear approach with one size fits all on the ground, and preparedness, response, recovery efforts which affects the lives of people with disabilities, with diverse disabilities and identities are not addressed. It impacts and accelerates to risks, especially the vulnerabilities and threats to their protection and safety. Climate crisis, including the internal and external crisis, has remained critically, especially to indigenous peoples, indigenous women, and minority with disabilities. And they often live in the area of particular risks relating to climate change, environmental, land territories, forest with militarization, armed conflict, including the impact of the extractive industries and developmental projects. And that is why we feel that they are abused, killed, and missing most often. The right to self-determination and free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples are often violated, and different stakeholders need to act on that. Similarly, the women and girls with disabilities are at the heightened risks of sexual, gender, cultural, and collective violence, abuse, trauma, stress, and anxiety during the humanitarian crisis and emergencies. It is generally the disability, gender, and cultural sensitive and accessible, conducive, meaningful environment remains a challenge to them. On the ground, we still find the patriarchal, colonialistic, capitalistic mindset, including the socio-cultural, attitudinal, and environmental multiple barriers and discriminations continue to impede the access to persons with disabilities to participation and decision-making at all stages of planning and development. And often they are passive recipients in the humanitarian crisis and emergencies. The lack of data and disability cultural sensitive approach and the collective campaign to stand for the injustice exist beyond and within us. Like the violence unfolding upon the Palestinian people, primarily not exclusively to Gaza, has spurred the public outrage across the world as a human rights and disability rights movement. We cannot remain silent only with a statement. We need a collective actions and also collective campaign for the social justice from all the stakeholders within and beyond us. We have the different spatial normative mandates for persons with disabilities, including the Article 11 of the Convention. But we hardly find these normative frameworks transform into practice with the realities. So for us, it is a time for us to shape these narratives, evidences, and the normative framework from our own lived experiences with the best practices from the ground on the one hand. On the other hand, it is time to act and work collectively to implement the existing framework with the human rights and intersectional lens within and beyond us, so that all people, including people with disabilities, with diverse disabilities, will not be left behind. And collectively, we can commit for making our rights real in the humanitarian crisis and emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gurung. Now I want to share with you a short summary of the main points and highlights of the panel discussion, which was prepared with the support of the Secretariat. This roundtable has called attention to the dire situation of many persons with disabilities in situations of risk and during humanitarian emergencies. Persons with disabilities suffer higher mortality rates. They face barriers to evacuation as early warnings and evacuation procedures are often inaccessible. They may be left behind, abandoned in institutions. They are at higher risk to be killed, to be victims of sexual violence or abduction. During conflict, disasters, and other emergencies, the barriers they face are exacerbated due to the destruction of infrastructure and services. They may not be able to access assistive technology and support services. Disability inclusion in emergency responses tends to be under-resourced and under-prioritized. Persons with disabilities are often the last ones to receive humanitarian assistance. Speakers and participants have listed various actions that need to be taken to ensure the safety of persons with disabilities and ensure that their rights are protected during situations of risk and emergencies, such as the promotion of inclusion and intersectional approaches in risk management and in emergency responses, making sure that information is accessible and easy to understand, establishing mechanisms to monitor and enforce implementation of inclusive emergency responses, and improving data and research to understand the impact of war and other emergencies on persons with disabilities, including on children with disabilities, to inform programming and policy making. Speakers and participants also stressed the need to consult with persons with disabilities and their organizations in developing protection measures for persons with disabilities, to conduct awareness-raising initiatives and capacity building of humanitarian actions, military personnel and other relevant staff to train people to assist persons with disabilities in cases in which quick evacuation is needed, and to ensure no gender-based violence during and after situations of risk or emergencies. This roundtable highlighted the importance of investing in community support systems for persons with disabilities that remain functional and effective during regular times as well as emergencies. Thank you all for a productive discussion, identifying concrete solutions to ensure that the CRPD is a reality for all persons with disabilities during and after the situations of risk and emergencies. Now, on behalf of Ms. Gurung, my fellow co-chair, I would like to thank all of your distinguished panelists of this roundtable and all delegates and participants from civil society and the United Nations system for your valuable contributions that enriched the discussion of our roundtable on the urgent issue of persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. I wish to acknowledge with sincere thanks the support and services provided by the Secretariat, notably UNDESA, and all of the interpreters, card service providers, and sign language interpreters, among many others who have worked tirelessly to deliver this successful meeting. Thank you all for your work and contributions. I would also like to remind all speakers to consider sending their statements to e-statement@un.org for posting it in the UN Journal no later than 2 hours after delivery, if you wish to do so. With this, Roundtable 2 is now formally concluded, and I declare the meeting closed. I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.